"Step away from the door," Officer Mark Callahan ordered, as if Danielle Brooks were trespassing on the home her family had owned for 23 years. Danielle kept one hand wrapped around her keys and the other visible beside her coat. The porch light glowed above her, warm and familiar, illuminating the brass numbers she had polished that morning. Behind the narrow glass panel, a framed photograph showed Danielle between her parents on the day they bought the house. Callahan never looked at it. Neither did Officer Travis Reed, who stood near the patrol car with one hand resting beside his radio, watching her as though she might suddenly become dangerous. "This is my home," Danielle said. Her voice was calm, but she could hear her mother moving behind the door, one careful step at a time. Callahan glanced at the small brick house, then at Danielle's dark skin, her simple wool coat, and the canvas work bag hanging from her shoulder. His expression tightened with certainty. "We received a report of someone trying to enter this property. I used a key." Danielle lifted it slightly. The metal caught the flashing blue light and sent a cold reflection across her fingers. 3 houses down, a curtain shifted. Across the street, a teenager raised his phone. Callahan stepped closer. "Put the keys down." Danielle slowly placed them on the porch rail. The air smelled of wet pavement and fallen oak leaves. Her car engine still ticked behind her, cooling after the drive home. She had been standing there less than 2 minutes, yet the street had already changed. Doors remained closed. Porch lights came on. Faces appeared behind windows. Everyone was watching, but no one knew what they were watching yet. "May I see the complaint?" Danielle asked. "You may answer questions at the station." Reed moved toward her work bag. Danielle shifted it behind her without thinking, then stopped. She knew how quickly an ordinary movement could be rewritten by someone else. "There are government documents in that bag," she said carefully. Callahan gave a humorless smile. "Of course there are." The front door opened 3 inches. Danielle's mother, Evelyn, appeared in the gap, one hand gripping her walking cane. "That is my daughter," she said. Her voice was thin from the stroke, but every word landed clearly. "She lives here." Callahan barely turned. "Ma'am, go back inside." Evelyn did not move. Danielle saw fear gather in her mother's face, and something colder settled beneath her own ribs. This was not confusion. Confusion listened. Confusion checked an address. Confusion looked at the key, the photograph, the woman standing in her own doorway. Callahan had already decided what Danielle was before he ever asked her name. He reached for her wrist. Danielle did not pull away. She looked past him, toward the camera mounted beneath the neighbor's porch roof. A tiny red light blinked through the evening mist. Then she looked directly at Callahan's body camera. "Make sure that stays on," she said. His jaw tightened. "Turn around." Danielle faced her own front door as he placed the cuffs around her wrists. The metal felt cold, but her breathing remained steady. Behind the glass, the family photograph seemed to watch in silence. Evelyn called her name. Danielle closed her eyes for half a second, then opened them again. As Callahan guided her toward the patrol car, she glanced once at the blinking camera across the street and whispered words only the nearest microphone could catch. "They finally did it." Callahan assumed she was afraid. He had no idea she had been waiting 6 months for this exact mistake. The rear door closed with a heavy click, sealing Danielle inside a space that smelled faintly of vinyl, rain, and old coffee. Blue light moved across the window in slow pulses, turning the houses on her street into brief flashes of color and shadow. Through the glass, she watched Evelyn standing on the porch beneath the warm light, one hand on her cane and the other pressed against the doorframe. Reed spoke to her from several feet away, but Danielle could not hear the words. She could only see her mother's face, the fear in it, and the effort it took for her to remain upright. Danielle lowered her eyes to the cuffs around her wrists and counted her breaths. 4 seconds in. 4 seconds out. Panic wasted oxygen, and she needed her mind clear. 6 months earlier, the work had begun with a number that refused to make sense. Danielle had been reviewing public safety contracts for a federal community grant when she found 3 invoices for body cameras that had never reached the department's inventory. The money had been approved. The serial numbers existed. The equipment did not. At first, she assumed it was an accounting error. Then she found patrol car repairs billed to vehicles that had been out of service for years. Training funds had been routed through a private consulting company with no employees. Complaint records disappeared from the system days after they were filed. Each irregularity carried the same names in the approval chain, and one of those names belonged to Sergeant Robert Hayes. Danielle had learned long ago that corruption rarely announced itself. It hid inside routine language, ordinary signatures, and amounts small enough to avoid attention. She had followed the trail quietly, working from the dining room table after Evelyn went to sleep. Their house was modest, with creaking floors, narrow hallways, and a kitchen window that faced an old maple tree. Danielle's father had repaired every loose hinge and uneven step himself before cancer took him 8 years earlier. He had left behind a toolbox, a mortgage paid in full, and one rule she still carried with her. Never accuse anyone before the evidence can speak without you. So Danielle had waited. She copied records. She verified dates. She compared dispatch logs with arrest reports and discovered a pattern that made her stomach tighten. Most of the questionable stops happened in black neighborhoods. Most involved missing camera footage. Most ended with charges reduced or dismissed after weeks of fear, missed work, and legal bills. The people affected rarely filed complaints twice. Danielle understood why. Systems like this did not survive because no one saw them. They survived because people learned what happened to those who spoke. The patrol car pulled away from the curb. Danielle watched her house grow smaller through the rain-speckled window. On the porch rail, her keys still rested where Callahan had ordered her to leave them. The sight hurt more than the cuffs. She had driven home that evening carrying the final set of documents needed to connect the missing funds to the altered arrest records. A federal investigator was supposed to contact her the following morning. She had expected surveillance, pressure, perhaps a warning disguised as bureaucracy. She had not expected them to arrive at her door before she crossed the threshold. Callahan glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "You got quiet," he said. Danielle met his eyes in the reflection. "I am listening." "To what?" She looked toward the front console, where his radio hissed beneath the sound of the wipers. "To what you decide to say next." His expression changed, only slightly. Reed turned in the passenger seat and studied her for the first time. Danielle leaned back against the cold seat. Outside, the city moved past in blurred storefronts and wet traffic lights. Inside her coat sleeve, hidden beneath the cuff, a small indicator pressed softly against her skin. One pulse. Then another. The signal had not stopped. The patrol car turned beneath a concrete archway and entered the rear lot of the precinct, where rainwater gathered in shallow pools beneath white security lights. Danielle looked through the window at the brick building rising ahead of her. It was smaller than she had imagined, only 3 stories, with narrow windows and a flag snapping above the entrance. Yet the place carried the weight of something much larger. People had walked through those doors with complaints, questions, and fear. Some had come out quieter than they went in. Officer Reed opened the rear door and stepped aside. Callahan took Danielle by the arm, not roughly, but with the casual ownership of someone who believed the building itself had already declared him right. Inside, the air was too warm. Fluorescent lights hummed over gray tile floors, and the front desk smelled of copier toner and burnt coffee. A television mounted high in one corner played a local weather report with the sound turned off. 2 officers looked up as Danielle entered. One recognized Callahan and gave him a brief nod. Neither asked why a woman in a wool coat had been brought in from her own front porch. Callahan placed Danielle's canvas bag on the counter. "Possible trespass, refusal to cooperate, suspicious documents," he said. The desk officer glanced at Danielle, then at the bag. "At a residence." "Her story," Callahan replied. Danielle said nothing. She watched the exchange carefully. The desk officer did not request the address. He did not ask whether ownership had been verified. He opened a blank intake form and began typing. That was how the system protected itself, Danielle realized. Not through dramatic conspiracies, but through small decisions made without question. A door opened at the end of the hall. Sergeant Robert Hayes stepped out wearing a pressed uniform shirt with silver bars at the collar. He was in his late 50s, broad through the shoulders, with close-cropped gray hair and the controlled expression of a man accustomed to being obeyed before he finished speaking. His eyes moved from Callahan to Danielle and stopped there for half a second too long. Recognition. Not surprise. Danielle felt the small pulse beneath her sleeve again. Hayes approached slowly. What happened? Callahan gave a shortened version, leaving out Evelyn, the key, and the family photograph visible through the door. Hayes listened with his hands resting near his belt. When Callahan mentioned government documents, Hayes looked toward the canvas bag. Bring her to interview too, he said. No need to book her yet. Reed hesitated. Should we verify the property first? The room became still in a way Danielle had learned to notice during audits. Silence could be a warning when someone had asked the correct question. Hayes turned his head toward Reed. Did I ask for a property search? No, Sergeant. Then do what I said. Reed lowered his eyes. Danielle was guided down a hallway lined with framed photographs of retired officers and plaques honoring years of service. The farther they walked, the quieter the building became. Interview 2 was a narrow room with a metal table, 3 chairs, and a black camera fixed near the ceiling. Callahan removed the cuffs and pointed to the chair facing the door. Danielle sat. Her wrists carried red marks, but she folded her hands calmly on the tabletop. Hayes entered last and closed the door behind him. He placed the canvas bag beside his chair without asking permission. Miss Brooks, he said, using her name for the first time, this can be very simple. Danielle looked at him. You already knew who I was. Callahan shifted near the wall. Hayes did not blink. Your identification was in your wallet. You have not opened my wallet. A faint ticking sound came from the clock above the door. Hayes leaned back and studied her with new attention. The confidence in the room remained, but it had changed shape. You seem to know a great deal about procedure, he said. Danielle looked toward the camera in the corner. A tiny red light glowed beneath the lens. Enough to know when someone is skipping it. Hayes followed her gaze, then smiled without warmth. Cameras make people feel safe. He reached across the table and opened her bag. They rarely tell the whole story. Hayes removed a thin folder from Danielle's bag and placed it on the table between them. He did not open it immediately. Instead, he rested 2 fingers on the cover and watched her face, waiting for some sign of fear. Danielle gave him none. Callahan remained near the wall with his arms folded, while the camera above them continued to glow red. You were carrying restricted records, Hayes said. That is a serious problem. Danielle looked at the folder, then back at him. Those are copies of public contracts obtained through authorized review. That is not how this will be written. Hayes reached into a drawer beneath the table and produced a prepared statement. The paper was already dated. Her full name appeared at the top. Callahan's name was printed beneath a section labeled Arresting Officer. Danielle read the first line without touching it. It claimed she had refused to identify herself outside a residence that did not belong to her. The next line stated that she had become disruptive when officers attempted to investigate. The final paragraph said she had voluntarily surrendered the documents after admitting she was not permitted to possess them. Danielle lifted her eyes. You prepared this before I arrived? Hayes leaned back. We prepare forms in advance all the time. You prepared my confession in advance. Callahan stepped away from the wall. Nobody said confession. Danielle turned the paper slightly so both men could see the language clearly. It says I admitted wrongdoing. I did not. Hayes slid a pen toward her. The plastic rolled across the metal surface and stopped near her hand. Sign it, and you can go home tonight. Rain tapped softly against the narrow window in the door. Somewhere in the hallway, a telephone rang twice, then stopped. Danielle thought of Evelyn standing beneath the porch light, still waiting for an explanation that had never come. She thought of the other people who had sat in this room, exhausted and frightened, offered freedom in exchange for words that were not true. No, she said. The single word settled into the room. Callahan gave a short laugh. You want to spend the night here over a misunderstanding? A misunderstanding can be corrected, Danielle replied. A lie has to be maintained. Hayes studied her for several seconds. You believe you are protected because you know a few regulations. I believe the truth does not become false because I am sitting in your chair. The warmth disappeared from his expression. He picked up the pen and tapped it once against the statement. You are making this difficult. I am making it accurate. Callahan looked toward the camera. She keeps performing for the lens. Hayes followed his gaze. Then, without breaking eye contact with Danielle, he stood and walked to the wall beneath the camera. A small control panel sat beside the door. He entered a code. The red light above the lens blinked once and went dark. The room seemed to shrink around them. Callahan smiled. Now we can speak honestly. Danielle looked at the dead camera, then at the body camera clipped to Callahan's uniform. Its indicator was still on. That one is recording, she said. Callahan glanced down as though he had forgotten it was there. He unclipped the device and placed it face down on the table. The light vanished beneath the black casing. Hayes returned to his seat. No cameras, he said. No. Confusion. Just you, us, and a simple choice. Danielle felt the quiet pulse beneath her sleeve. One signal. Then another. She placed both hands flat on the table and looked directly at Hayes. You had a chance to let the truth walk away. His eyes narrowed. What is that supposed to mean? Danielle glanced at the prepared statement. It means you should be very careful what you do next. Hayes did not answer immediately. He opened the folder at last and began removing pages one by one, arranging them across the table with deliberate care. Purchase orders. Vehicle maintenance logs. Equipment invoices. Complaint summaries. Each document carried signatures, dates, and account codes Danielle had traced through months of quiet work. Callahan leaned closer, and the confidence in his face faded by a fraction. Where did you get these? He asked. Through authorized review, Danielle said. You already heard that. Hayes picked up a page listing body camera purchases and held it beneath the ceiling light. These are internal records. They became federal records when federal grant money paid for them. The room went still again. Hayes lowered the paper. You think that word changes something? It changes who has jurisdiction. Callahan reached for the folder, but Hayes stopped him with a glance. Danielle noticed the exchange. Hayes was no longer treating the documents as a nuisance. He was calculating how much she knew. He selected another page, this one showing repair charges for 3 patrol vehicles that had been removed from service nearly 2 years earlier. The approving signature belonged to him. Numbers can be misunderstood, Hayes said. That is why audits verify patterns. You are not an auditor. Danielle held his gaze. You already knew my name before anyone checked my identification. You knew what was in my bag before you opened it. You had a statement waiting with my address and your officer's version of events already written. So either this department works faster than any agency I have ever reviewed, or tonight was arranged. Callahan's face tightened. Careful. Danielle did not look at him. I am being careful. Hayes gathered the pages into a stack and slid them toward himself. These materials are now evidence in an active investigation. There is no active investigation against me. There can be. He stood, carried the folder to a steel cabinet, and placed it inside. The lock turned with a soft metallic click. Danielle watched the key disappear into his pocket. That is not evidence storage, she said. It is tonight. Callahan lifted her canvas bag and searched the remaining compartments. He found a charger, a notebook, a bottle of water, and the old phone Danielle had carried as a decoy. He pressed the power button. The screen lit with a simple passcode request. Unlock it. No, then we will request access. Request it. Callahan looked toward Hayes. She is hiding something. Hayes nodded toward the phone. Secure it. Callahan placed it on the table, wrapped it in an evidence pouch, and wrote a number across the label. Danielle watched him carefully. The number did not match the intake sequence printed on the form beside him. Another small shortcut. Another thread in the pattern. The door opened, and Officer Emily Carter stepped inside carrying a clipboard. She was younger than the others, with rain still darkening the shoulders of her uniform. Sergeant, dispatch confirmed the address, she said. The property belongs to Evelyn Brooks. Danielle Brooks is listed as a resident. Callahan looked away. Hayes did not. Leave the report, he said. Emily placed the clipboard on the table. Her eyes moved to the prepared statement, then to the dark camera above the door, then to Callahan's body camera lying face down. Something changed in her expression. Is the recording system down? She asked. Temporary issue, Hayes replied. Return to the desk. Emily hesitated for 1 second too long. Hayes turned toward her. Officer Carter. Yes, Sergeant. She left, but not before Danielle saw her glance at the evidence label. Hayes closed the door again. The address checks out, Danielle said. So release me. The address was one question. It was the reason given for the arrest. Hayes sat down and folded his hands. The situation has developed. Callahan placed a new form on the table. This one. Accused Danielle of interfering with an investigation and withholding protected information. The lines beneath the charges were blank, waiting to be filled. Sign the first statement, Hayes said, and this one never exists. Danielle looked at the paper, then at the locked cabinet holding her documents. The pulse beneath her sleeve continued at the same steady rhythm. You are not offering me a way out, she said. You are asking me to help you build a wall around what you did. Hayes leaned forward. You are alone in this room. Danielle's voice remained quiet. No. You only turned off the cameras you could see. Hayes stared at Danielle as the rain pressed harder against the narrow window, each drop catching the fluorescent light before sliding into darkness. For several seconds, no one spoke. The room held only the hum of the ceiling fixture and the faint static from a radio somewhere beyond the door. Then Hayes stood, collected both forms, and left without explanation. Callahan followed, carrying the sealed evidence pouch with Danielle's phone. The lock clicked behind them. Silence settled over the room. Danielle remained seated with her hands resting on the cold table. The red marks around her wrists had begun to deepen, but she did not rub them. Instead, she listened. A printer started in the hallway. Footsteps crossed from one side of the station to the other. A drawer opened. A voice lowered when someone approached. Ordinary sounds, but beneath them ran a nervous rhythm that had not been there when she arrived. They were no longer deciding what to do with her. They were trying to decide what to do with the truth. The overhead light flickered once. Then again. For a moment, the room dimmed enough for Danielle to see her reflection in the black camera lens above the door. Her father's voice returned to her, calm and steady, the way it had sounded at the dining room table when she was 15 and furious about a teacher who had accused her of cheating. Never raise your voice when the truth is already speaking. At the time, she had thought he was asking her to be quiet. Years later, she understood he had been teaching her how not to surrender control. Danielle closed her eyes and took one slow breath. She thought of the names she had found buried in dismissed reports. Marcus Hill, held overnight after a traffic stop that produced no citation. Tasha Green, accused of resisting after asking why her camera footage had disappeared. Leonard Price, a retired postal worker whose complaint had been entered, edited, and deleted within 48 hours. Each name had become a row in a spreadsheet. Each row had once been a person sitting in a room like this, waiting for someone to believe them. Danielle opened her eyes. A soft pulse pressed against the inside of her sleeve. The transmitter was still active. The device was no larger than a quarter, hidden inside the band of her watch, designed to send short bursts of encrypted audio and location data whenever it detected the station's secured network. She had not known whether it would work inside the building. Now the steady pulse told her the signal had found its path. Outside the room, Officer Emily Carter stood near the records desk holding the clipboard she had taken from interview 2. She looked down at the arrest statement and compared it with the dispatch log on her monitor. The times did not match. The report claimed Danielle had refused identification at 7:14. The patrol car had not arrived at the house until 7:19. Emily checked again, hoping she had read it wrong. She had not. Her eyes moved to the evidence number Callahan had written on the pouch. It belonged to a case closed 3 months earlier. She glanced toward Hayes's office. Through the glass, he was speaking sharply into a telephone while Callahan paced beside the desk. Emily had seen altered reports before. She had told herself they were corrections, administrative shortcuts, harmless ways to keep a busy station moving. But this was different. The lie had been prepared before the event. Her hand tightened around the clipboard. On the bottom of the bulletin board beside her hung a faded notice about federal whistleblower protections. Most officers passed it every day without reading it. Emily tore off one of the small contact tabs and slipped it beneath the report. Back inside. Interview 2, the lights flickered a third time. Danielle heard a distant roll of thunder, then the sudden quiet that followed. A single drop of water fell from a leaking pipe near the wall and struck the tile floor. Then another. Slow. Measured. Like a clock counting down. Danielle looked at the dark camera above her and understood that the room was no longer empty. Every word spoken inside it had already traveled beyond those walls. The first sound was not a siren. It was the sudden silence of every radio in the station at once. Danielle lifted her head. Beyond the interview room door, chairs scraped across the floor, footsteps stopped, and someone near the front desk whispered a question that no one answered. Then white light swept across the narrow window, brighter than the fluorescent ceiling, followed by the low rumble of engines entering the rear lot. Hayes appeared in the hallway. His face had lost its practiced calm. "What is happening?" Callahan asked behind him. Hayes moved toward the records desk and reached for the telephone, but the line was already dead. Outside, black sport utility vehicles formed a line across the entrance, their tires cutting through rainwater beneath the security lamps. Men and women in dark jackets stepped out in coordinated silence. Yellow letters across their backs caught the light. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Department of Justice. Office of Inspector General. The station doors opened, and a clear voice carried through the lobby. Federal warrant. Everyone remain where you are. No one moved. The officers who had looked through Danielle earlier now stared toward the entrance as Special Agent Rebecca Sloan walked inside with a sealed document in one hand. She was tall, composed, and dressed in a charcoal raincoat darkened at the shoulders. Two agents followed her toward the front desk while another team secured the computer room and records hall. Hayes stepped forward. "This is a local police facility. You cannot enter without coordination." Rebecca held up the warrant. Coordination ended when evidence was concealed and a protected witness was detained. The words seemed to pull the air from the building. Callahan. Looked toward interview 2. Danielle could not see his entire face through the window, but she saw recognition arrive. It was slow at first, then absolute. Hayes attempted to regain control. "There is no protected witness here." Rebecca turned toward him. "Danielle Elaine Brooks. Federal Witness Identification Number 4729. The room around Danielle became perfectly still. Rebecca continued, her voice steady enough to reach every corner of the station. She was cooperating in an investigation involving misuse of federal funds, falsified arrest records, destruction of camera evidence, and discriminatory enforcement practices. Hayes said nothing. His hand remained suspended near the telephone. Emily stood behind the records desk with the false statement still hidden beneath her clipboard. Her eyes moved from Rebecca to the darkened interview camera. Then she stepped forward. "Agent Sloan," she said. Hayes turned sharply. "Officer Carter, do not speak." Emily's shoulders tightened, but she did not step back. "I have a report that was prepared before the arrest occurred." Rebecca looked at her. "Preserve it. Do not hand it to anyone except an agent." Callahan reached toward the evidence pouch on the desk. An investigator moved between him and the counter. "Leave it where it is." "It is only a telephone," Callahan said. Danielle heard the uncertainty in his voice through the door. Rebecca glanced at the pouch. "No. It is a decoy device." Callahan stared at it as if the object had changed before his eyes. Rebecca turned toward interview 2. The primary transmission came through a secured audio module embedded in Miss Brooks's watch. The neighborhood camera recorded the initial stop. Her location signal confirmed transport. Your internal network carried the rest. Hayes looked toward Danielle, and for the first time that night, he did not see a woman he could pressure into signing a statement. He saw months of decisions returning to him all at once. An agent opened the interview room door. Warm hallway air entered, carrying the smell of rain and wet wool. Rebecca stepped inside and placed both hands where Danielle could see them. "Miss Brooks, are you injured?" "No," Danielle said. "My mother is alone. An agent is with her now. She is safe." Danielle closed her eyes for one brief second. When she opened them, Callahan and Hayes were standing beneath the station lights while federal investigators sealed the records room, photographed the dark cameras, and removed the key to the cabinet holding her documents. Rebecca reached toward Danielle's wrist. "We can take that transmitter off now." Danielle looked through the open doorway at the station that had seemed so powerful less than an hour earlier. "Not yet," she said quietly. "There are still people here who need to be heard." Rebecca did not remove the transmitter. Instead, she nodded to one of the agents, who brought a chair into the hallway and placed it beside the records desk. Danielle walked out of interview 2 slowly, feeling the warmth of the station return to her skin. The building had changed. The same fluorescent lights still hummed above the gray floors, but the officers who had once moved with casual certainty now stood apart from their desks while federal teams photographed files, sealed computers, and marked storage cabinets with evidence tape. Hayes remained near his office under the supervision of 2 investigators. Callahan stood several feet away, staring at the floor. Neither man looked powerful anymore. They looked ordinary, and that made the truth feel even heavier. Rebecca opened the steel cabinet and removed Danielle's folder. "Please confirm these are your documents." Danielle checked the first page, then the next. "They are." "Were any removed?" Danielle examined the stack carefully. One invoice was missing. Before she could answer, Emily stepped forward holding her clipboard against her chest. "Sergeant Hayes took a page into his office," she said. Hayes turned toward her. "You do not know what you saw." Emily's face went pale, but her voice held. "I saw the vehicle repair invoice. I also saw the arrest statement before the patrol car arrived." The station became quiet again. Rebecca looked at Emily. "How many reports have you seen altered?" Emily lowered her eyes. "More than I admitted to myself." Hayes gave a bitter laugh. "She is protecting her career." Danielle watched Emily struggle beneath the weight of those words. Fear had trained the young officer to stay silent, but silence was no longer protecting anyone. Danielle stepped closer, stopping at a respectful distance. "Then speak now," she said. Emily looked up. Danielle did not offer comfort that erased responsibility. She offered a door. Emily took one breath and began naming dates, case numbers, and officers who had been instructed to rewrite reports. She explained how camera failures were blamed on faulty equipment even when supervisors had ordered recordings disabled. She described complaints moved into inactive folders and evidence labels reused so items could vanish without creating new entries. Every sentence seemed to loosen something inside the room. One officer near the front desk raised his hand and said he had saved copies of deleted dispatch logs. Another admitted that he had been told to stop checking addresses during certain neighborhood calls. Rebecca assigned agents to each of them. Hayes watched the structure he had built begin to open from the inside. Callahan finally looked at Danielle. "I followed orders," he said. His voice was smaller than it had been on her porch. Danielle studied him. "You looked at my house, my keys, and my mother. Then you chose which facts mattered." He had no answer. Rebecca asked whether Danielle wanted to leave through the rear entrance, away from the news crews gathering beyond the front windows. Danielle looked toward the lobby doors. Rain streaked the glass, and camera lights glowed outside like distant stars. "No," she said. "People were brought in through the front. I will leave through the front." Before walking out, she handed Rebecca a list stored in her notebook. It contained the names of every person whose complaint had been changed, buried, or deleted. "Do not let this investigation end with what happened to me," Danielle said. Rebecca accepted the list with both hands. "It will not." Danielle crossed the lobby as federal agents continued their work behind her. Emily stood near the records desk, speaking into a recorder, her voice shaking but clear. Hayes and Callahan remained beneath the cold station lights, surrounded not by enemies, but by the evidence of their own choices. When the front doors opened, cool rain touched Danielle's face. Dozens of people waited behind the barriers, some holding phones, others simply watching. Danielle did not raise her hands or smile for the cameras. She stepped into the night with the same quiet dignity she had carried inside, and one by one, people who had once believed no one would listen began moving toward the federal agents to tell their own stories. By the time Danielle reached her street, the rain had softened to a silver mist. A federal sedan stopped at the curb, and Rebecca stepped out first, opening the rear door for her. The neighborhood was awake now. Porch lights burned along both sides of the block, and curtains shifted as people watched from windows. No one spoke. Danielle crossed the wet sidewalk and saw Evelyn waiting beneath the warm light, wrapped in a gray sweater, one hand resting on her cane. For a moment, neither woman moved. Then Danielle climbed the steps, and Evelyn reached for her with both arms. The embrace was quiet, careful, and long enough for Danielle to feel the fear leave her mother one breath at a time. Her keys still rested on the porch rail where she had placed them. Danielle picked them up and held them in her palm. Such a small object. A few ounces of metal. Yet hours earlier, the officers had looked at those keys and decided they meant nothing because of the hand holding them. Rebecca remained near the sidewalk, giving them space. "The station is secured," she said. "Hayes and Callahan have been placed under federal arrest. Their records division is being reviewed, and the district attorney has agreed to reopen every case connected to the altered reports." Danielle looked toward the street. Several neighbors had stepped onto their porches. The teenager who recorded the arrest stood across the road with his phone lowered at his side. "What about the people on the list?" Danielle asked. "We are contacting them tonight," Rebecca replied. "No one will have to prove alone what the department worked together to hide." Danielle nodded. That mattered more than seeing two men lose their badges. Justice was not a single dramatic moment. It was the slow repair of names, jobs, records, and trust. It was making sure a mother did not have to explain to her children why the truth had not protected her. It was returning time to people who could never fully get it back. In the weeks that followed, Emily Carter testified before a federal grand jury. Other officers came forward. Missing videos were recovered from archived servers. More than 30 cases were reopened, and 12 wrongful charges were dismissed. The city created an independent review board with community members who had once been ignored. Callahan claimed he had followed orders. Hayes claimed the records were misunderstood. But documents did not forget, timestamps did not bend, and the voices recorded inside interview 2 carried farther than either man expected. Danielle returned to work without ceremony. She continued caring for Evelyn, reviewing contracts, and eating breakfast at the same small kitchen table where the investigation had begun. One clear Saturday morning, she stood outside replacing the damaged lock on the front door. Evelyn swept dried leaves from the porch while sunlight warmed the brick and flashed across the new brass plate. Across the street, the teenager watched her tighten the final screw. "Miss Brooks," he called, "were you scared?" Danielle looked at the red marks fading from her wrists, then at the house her father had protected with patience, labor, and pride. "Yes," she said. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is deciding that fear does not get to choose what you do." She placed the screwdriver back into her father's old toolbox and tested the key. The lock turned smoothly. Evelyn opened the door from inside, and the familiar warmth of the house reached the porch. Danielle paused before stepping across the threshold. She looked once toward the street, where morning light rested on the pavement that had reflected police lights only days earlier. Then she entered, and the door closed gently behind her by her own choice. The lesson was simple, though the cost had not been. Authority can demand silence, but it cannot make a lie true. Kindness does not mean surrender, and dignity does not require permission. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who refuses to become cruel while insisting that justice be done. And if you had been standing on that porch, with your home behind you and powerful people refusing to see the truth, would you have stayed silent, or would you have found the courage to make them listen?